If you knew me before, you wouldn't even look my way. If I had the nerve to speak, you wouldn't hear what I say. Time has come and gone so fast, we're not who we used to be.
And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm here with Mandy. Mandy, thank you so much for joining me today. Please tell people your experience in regards to your background and experience. Sorry.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I am a professor of criminal justice, but I also teach psychology. I teach counseling. My background is as a victimology expert and domestic violence expert. I have spoken at a lot of different universities and try to research cases to really find out at the core, is there more than just meets the eye? What's going on here, and do research on that, and then take that back to the families and help them get some resolution.
Because
sorry.
No, go ahead.
There's just never never going to be fixed for them, but at least they can get some resolution to their loved one being lost or being gone.
Yeah, because one of the things and one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation today in particular is because there's so many misconceptions out there. There's so many misperceptions about what a victim goes through when they go through one of these relationships. And I guess the first place to start is, what is it about abusers that is so attractive to people? Because a lot of people are under this misconception that a lot of people don't understand that most abusers are master manipulators.
So one of the things that is very telling when you first meet someone, and maybe you're saying you're going to, you're starting to date or, just get to know each other, is how fast they move the relationship. If they move it extremely fast, now that doesn't always mean they're going to be that, but it's signs to look for. When you date someone, the love bombing, that's also something you really need to watch out for, which that kind of goes along with moving that relationship fast. There are certain signs that you can really, if you just pay attention to, and you really need to for your safety, that you can catch on to and realize, okay, maybe this isn't the healthiest relationship for me, and head it off before, it gets to that point. Now, with that said, there are people that are true, sociopaths or true psychopaths that they can slide that in past people a lot. But anything we can do to help cut that down is very important.
And when you talk about love bombing, what are some examples of love bombing that you're talking about?
So if you meet someone and you've maybe talked to them for a couple weeks, or, maybe went on one date with them, and then they are, oh, you're everything I've ever wanted. I've never met anyone like you. You're, we need to get married. They just take it to the extreme, and they keep on and on and on with it. And what they're doing is they're building you up. And because to break you down, they're going to build you all the way up. But they do it to the point where they don't know you yet. And so they really don't know how you are enough to tell you all these things.
Interesting. And so it's really like they're kind of conditioning the victim, if you will, into sort of expecting that same level throughout the entire relationship.
They do. And that also goes along with later how they isolate the victim, because they will, they'll love bomb you and get you to where you almost need them, because you need that reassurance from them, because they almost will sit there and say, okay, no one else can love you like I can. No one else can feel the way I can for you. And they make you believe that. And so then later on, when they're breaking you down, you believe that, why would I leave this person? Because no one else is going to do this for me.
So that sort of introduces a level of codependency along the way. Interesting. Because one of the things that I found fascinating too is I do my job supports a lot of domestic violence victims. And one of the reoccurring things that I hear from people who don't have any experience from domestic violence or with domestic violence is this question of like, why can't you just leave them? And I keep trying to say, well, it's not that simple. There's a lot of layers, there's a lot of pieces. And so, like, what do you say to people that question whether or not a victim has the ability or even capacity to leave their abuser?
So many times we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. So a lot of times when a victim is in a domestic violence relationship, they're usually isolated to the point there's only one person that usually in their family they'll let them talk to, and they isolate everyone else just so they can still have that little line, so those people aren't questioning, why they're not talking to everyone else. So they've still got a lifeline, but it's usually small. So what happens is that they become so isolated, and we don't know. A lot of times, I say we don't know, but a lot of times they're threatening the victim behind the scenes. They're telling, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill, your family. If you ever leave me, you're not going to take our child. I'll find you. And they back that up by mental and physical, whether hurting someone physically or mentally, they back that up. And so the victim becomes scared. And this is the thing, when we're dependent on someone for our livelihood, a lot of times there's no money anywhere else. They've isolated them from everyone else. They have nowhere to go. They feel like, I can't pay for myself or my child to live, so this is better than living on the street, or this is, and there's not a lot of resources that people know about, especially rurally. When they're rural, they don't know about a lot of these resources they have available to them. So they stay in these relationships because they think they have no other choice.
And it's interesting because, like, the games that they play on the back end, like hiding keys before your appointment, or, oversleeping when they're supposed to give you a ride to a very important document or a very important doctor's appointment. And so there's all these little games that they play behind the scenes, and then they save face and they look like these amazing, perfect human beings, to the point where I've seen countless examples where the family actually supports the abuser because of this picture they have of them, which is not real. It's curated. And so you also have the victim going like, why is my family on the support of my abuser? Like, do I really have to lose my family in order for me to leave this relationship? And that's a bad spot for anybody to be in.
Yes, and a lot of times abusers are charismatic. A perfect example is Stacy Peterson. I use that case a lot just because they've still never found her. And he's, very charismatic. If you have a chance to ever listen to an interview with him, like the listeners, or, just listen to audio and video of him, you will just be amazed at the lengths he goes to try to make the public think he is just it, and he winks at him. And I mean, he just says all kinds of things. He thinks that the media is his friend. And he is the typical, I use his case because it is really that typical love bombing, build you up, build you down, and then she's afraid to go anywhere, and then he tells everybody she ran off. I think he still to this day is telling everybody she ran off.
Yeah, that's a tough one too, because like it's one of those instances where, and I don't know if tough's the right word, it's just one of those things that my autistic brain sometimes, this is one of those heavy topics that's almost kind of difficult for me to talk about sometimes, because as a survivor myself, it's one of those very interesting things, because I didn't know a lot about myself until I left that whole scenario. And when you bring up that whole Lacey Peterson thing, it just really reminded me of a lot of situations that I've been in, because my abuser was very manipulative. And she had this persona that was public facing that everybody adored. Everybody told me I married up. Everybody told me that it was perfect, and all. So they sort of fed into that piece. And one of the things that I'm curious about is, because when it started, it was really good. With the love bombing, the sort of like almost perfection that didn't seem sort of normal, and it sort of stood out. But I missed the signs along the way, because it wasn't overnight. It's not like you turn from this person to this abusive relationship within a 6-month period. They kind of continuously test the boundaries, if you will, right?
They do. They will see what they can get away with. And many times, if they're not getting away with it with one person, they just move on. They do not keep on with one person normally at the beginning if they're not getting away with it. They don't waste their time with that. They can't control that person. There's no point. So usually they'll move on to someone they can control. And, you won't always see that. Now, there are some domestic violence relationships where you will not see any of that in the beginning. You won't see the love bombing. You won't see all that. Those are a little different, because that's more of, and it's hard to explain to listeners. It's hard to explain because there's different types of domestic violence, and when you get that, those are, to me, are more are scarier. It's all scary, but those are scarier. A perfect example is Jeffrey McDonald. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's a perfect example. Yes, and so you didn't see all that when you read about him, and you learn about him. But if you really watch him on videos, you can see it. It's just, there's subtle things. So he didn't really, there was not really that love bombing. He wasn't really doing all that, but he was very charismatic. And that is a lot of times a precursor. I hate that, because charismatic people are great. They're wonderful. But you do have to watch that in a relationship. It's just a little flag. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, but it is a flag you just kind of want to pay attention to, because they can overly do that. So Jeffrey McDonald, in his case, it's a horrendous case, but it's been the number one case I've ever researched, because he was a doctor, very Green Beret, very renowned, very well known. People loved him. And, from the outside, everyone thought he had this wonderful family. Even his wife's mom and stepdad thought their relationship was great. They had 2 little girls. She was pregnant. And then, of course, they're murdered. And all of them, except for him. And he is like, I didn't do it. Someone came in, murdered them. But then the stepdad started realizing some things as he went along, and started realizing some things don't look right here. He's really slipped past my radar. And so they started, realizing, he took his case home with him every night, his drug case home with him every night, and not to say that he ever did drugs, but it's one of those things you wonder about that could heighten that rage if someone ever did drugs or drank, and you really don't know from his case, because he slipped in past everyone. So there are those cases where, you just, it kind of comes out of the blue. But most of the time, drugs and alcohol fuel those. I will say that. I have found that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest risk to the safety of a family is when they make that decision to leave, right?
Yes. And a lot of times, it's not even the victim that they want to hurt. They want to hurt someone that the victim loves. And so that's why you've seen cases where they'll go in and they'll hurt the whole entire family, or they'll hurt their parents, or they'll hurt their children, and just so that victim suffers. And so, but there are so many cases, unfortunately, where it's the victim that, they hurt the victim.
Pays the ultimate price.
Yes, but it's kind of a buildup, and a lot of times they will back up what they say in the beginning because they want them to know they mean business, and they don't want them to leave them. And at the core of narcissism, which is so big in this, is insecurity, and people don't realize that really narcissism is a form of insecurity. So when you're that insecure, you have to have that control to take, so you feel like you can process properly in your life.
And it's interesting that one of the other misconceptions I hear all the time is that it's just men perpetrators.
No. Yes, no. It is, so domestic violence and being a victim is not just men. I mean, it's not just women. It's men, it's siblings, it's grandparents, it's anyone that you have a relationship with. It is not just spouses, and it's not just women. There are so many cases of men that have been abused and have even been killed by their female spouse. So that is a misconception completely. The statistics do not back that up. The statistics are very much now, is it higher on the female side? It is higher statistic-wise on the female side. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. And a lot of times it's brushed under the rug when it happens to a male. And so it is there. It is very much there.
And it's one of those things too where I can attest to, as a man, when you come forward and you say I need some help with this, it's interesting the response you get, because a lot of the times it's like, just suck it up, you have control. It's like so the advice is not the same that they would give women in the exact same situation. And it's one of those things that scares the living crap out of me, because how many other people have gone through what I went through?
Well, I look at Phil Hartman's case. So when I teach domestic violence, and I actually wrote that class, and I wrote victimology, I use Phil Hartman. He is one of the cases that my students can choose from. I have a case study, and they can choose from a couple different cases, and one of them is Phil Hartman. And I want them to look at his case, because it is, he was a big actor on Saturday Night Live, and his wife Bree, she had a drug and alcohol problem, and she had some depressive thoughts, and it just kept going. And I really don't think he thought that was going to happen to him, from everything I've researched and read. And in the end, she murdered him and then murdered herself. But I like to say, and I like to add this in, she did not murder herself at first. She waited, and then until she was caught and the police were surrounding her, and where she was in the bedroom, and then so I don't know that she was going to do that initially to herself. I don't know, but it is very prevalent, and and a lot of times, again, I've spoke before to different I say crowds, that's not really a right word, but different areas, different places where drugs and alcohol have been a factor in that. And I always say, you have this rage, but when you add a substance in with that, it heightens that rage, where a lot of times they cannot gain control of themselves. And so that it goes over the edge. Now, does that mean they're not responsible? No. But it means that they've already got that propensity there. And when they're doing that, they don't think they have the ability to control themselves at all.
And then, so if we go back to sort of like the beginning piece, right? And so you're seeing love bombing, and then you're seeing all this kind of stuff. Like, what are some of the things that we want to look out for? Some of the terms that the abusers may use that kind of gives us an idea of, like, maybe I need to pay attention a little bit more to what's going on.
Sure. So extreme jealousy. If they're jealous off the bat of even you talking to someone at work, or they're monitoring your social media constantly, that is and that's different from a spouse having your social media. That's different. They're monitoring it, wanting to know who's messaging you, maybe messaging those people themselves. That is a big thing to look for. Gaslighting, where they are telling you that you are wrong. Well, I wouldn't have acted this way if you hadn't have done this. Why did you do that? That's what made me upset, and that's why I acted that way. That's gaslighting. And so gaslighting is huge when it comes to domestic violence and victimology, because a lot of times people don't realize they're being gaslit because people can do it so subtly. So if anyone ever says that their actions are your fault, that is gaslighting, because their actions they have their own thoughts, they have critical thinking, they have their own mind, and when they're telling you that they did this because you did this, that's a warning sign, and you really need to watch those. I tell people, if you listen to your gut, our gut is, we make most of our serotonin in our gut. So when we have that gut feeling, that's true, it's real. So if you feel that, listen to it, because that means that something is not right. Another thing is mood swings. If they have alternating mood swings where they're happy one minute and mad the next, it doesn't have to be abusive behavior. It can just be where they come home, they're in a great mood, and 10 minutes later, because maybe their television show got canceled, I'm just making something up, and they just are so upset about that. And they're just slamming their fists down and, and screaming and all kinds of things. That's another sign that you need to look for. Depression and anxiety, that is also a huge sign, especially in the Phil Hartman case that I was talking about. His spouse had a lot of depression and anxiety that I know I've read about, that was, true from the past, that she's even admitted to. And so, that's something you have to look for. Not that means anything. We all can have things that happen in our life that make us sad, make us depressed, make us anxious. But it's when these symptoms are prolonged and they go along with abuse, and they go along with, if you leave me, I might hurt myself or hurt others. You've got to really watch for that, because that could be a form of manipulation. And then I think blaming, making excuses for everything, like you can't do that, but they can, that's another sign.
Oh, yeah. Like, I used to drive me wild when... So it's one thing if anger or sort of aggression sort of rears its ugly head. It's another thing if you are on the receiving end of that and you want to leave, you want to just take a break. Like, look, let's go calm down. Like, can I just go to another room and just have us relax? But then they don't let it go. They keep following you into the next room. They keep yelling. For my ex, she called it her inner Philly, and that was just the way that she communicated. And it was scary at times. And you kind of get used to it, but not get used to it. And then also with the gaslighting, like, that was just huge. And, like, I didn't even realize that was going on, just kind of like you were saying. And that was sort of like the eye-opening experience for me, is I was having these conversations with my supervisors at work that I wasn't having at home. Like, here are these two strangers asking me, am I okay? Well, no one's asked me that in almost 5 years. Like, that's interesting. Like, they're asking questions like, how can I support you? And like, oh, this, and so it's like a complete reversal. And that was sort of like the wake-up call for me, was like, oh, wait, if I'm having these healthy conversations at work, why am I not having these healthy conversations at home?
That is such a great point you just brought up, and I'm so sorry that's happened to you. It's so a lot of times and to kind of go back what you were saying, a lot of times people have asked me, well, you know about all this and you say all this, but do you really know about this? I do. I've experienced that myself. not as an adult. I was a young adult. I was a young adult. I would say a teenage to 2021. So I have experienced that, and it's hard when, especially too, when these younger people do not know what to look for, and when you're in that age where your mind is not fully formed, our brains are not fully formed, and till we're 25, and so we're just in that sweet spot where it's easy for someone to really manipulate us, and that's kind of when mine was. And it got to the point where this person tried to rip me out of the car window, beat the car window, and tried to pull me out of the window. So it's been a while, thank goodness, but I do remember it like it was yesterday. Those memories don't just go away. They're very clear. And, mine's been over, how old am I? Late 40s, and so it's been a little while, but I look back now and I can see those signs clearly that I could not see then, because I was so wrapped up in this love and this someone that loves me and wants to, take care of me and wants to be there for me. And, how exciting and wonderful is that to be, in high school, and then after high school, I have someone like that at 19 years old, 18 years old. And then you realize that, wow, all these signs that I remember clearly, and now I look back and I know how to put those into place if they were there. And that's one thing we can do, because I can guarantee there's probably not anyone that has ever not had someone at least try to gaslight them, probably, in their life. Even if it's not a spouse, you've had someone try to gaslight you, even career, whatever that is. So we take these experiences and we put them into our long-term memory, and we want to try to remember those, and you want to try to really be in that moment, so that way it will go into your long-term memory. And a lot of times, if it's traumatic, it will. If we don't really know about it, try to think back and see if anyone's ever said anything like that to you and gaslit you, and then take that and make a list. Get a notebook, make a list of things that you've seen that people have tried to do to you in the past, and keep that for future relationships or future interactions with people, so you can know, look back and say, oh, that person just tried to do what someone did to me, 10 years ago. And it really does make a difference, because sometimes people can really get under our radar. So it's better and safer to have a list like that. And that's one thing that I started out doing when I got into, looking at domestic violence. And what got me into that was being a school counselor. I saw in a very low socioeconomic area, and I saw a lot of domestic violence in those areas. And so that's when I was like, you know what, this is my niche. Like, I want to study this. I want to write courses on this. I want to write a book I want to do all this because I want to try to help others. Sorry, that was so long, but...
No, there's no such thing as too long of an answer on this podcast. You don't have to worry about that at all. But wasn't one of the things I'm also curious about in terms of the victim piece? Because, most abusers are looking for a certain kind of person, right?
They always say empathetic.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I thought it was like low self-esteem, but I think I'm coming around to what you're saying now. That makes a whole lot of sense. Tell me more. Someone that's
very empathetic and that wants to feel like they can help someone and fix someone, and they want to be there for someone, and they want to nurture someone, and so they take advantage of that. They take advantage of people that are empathetic. They really do.
That's fascinating. Because so empathy has always driven me, and I always thought she picked me out because of my lack of self-esteem. Before I met her, I really didn't have a vocabulary. I wasn't educated, so there was a lot of things about me that I was self-conscious about, and it was like the perfect strings to pull along the way to make sure that I was sort of kept on the sidelines, if you will. And a lot of accusing of cheating, a lot of accusations about, you must have, like, this is a coworker. I have not been alone with this person ever. Like, or even like one time, like her best friend's sister. And I'm like, where the heck is this coming from? And I never figured out until way later. It's like, oh, it's not coming from anywhere. This is just one more tactic in the toolbox that she uses to sort of control and make sure that I'm in line, if you will.
Yes, you saying that, and I don't. So this is just me, but I don't give the abuser that much credit. I don't like to give them credit. I don't think a lot of times that they're smart enough. I'm just going to say this. Yes, some of them are very smart. Yes. Let me say, if you're a sociopath, they're brilliant. But I don't give them enough credit because they're not empathetic to know what someone looks like that has, low self-esteem. Sometimes they do if it's very overt. But most of the time, I don't, because if you look like at other cases, I mean, a lot of these people had great lives and they were great people. And they had great families, great friends, and that's why they pick on them, because they're so empathetic and they think, oh, they're going to be so empathetic to my needs, and they're going to and I can just pull them into this web, and the abuser's getting something they want from it, which is someone to really just dote on them.
I really appreciate this conversation because, like, for the longest time, I think I was applying things to the abuser that I probably shouldn't have. Because you're right, and sort of one of the things too that I see play out in the media is everybody talks about the abuser, and nobody talks about, well, how do we support a victim? So I want to ask that question because I think it's very important, because, like, you have a family member, you might suspect that they're in an abusive relationship. What is the best advice you could give to a family member or a friend, even if the victim says, well, I'm not ready to leave, or maybe even denies it?
So that is a great question. So I have thought about this over the years, done research studies on this, and I have come to the realization, and the research study backs it up, statistics backs it up, that do not do nothing. Just don't. That is the worst thing you can do for someone, because it doesn't matter what they're telling you. You have to remember they're in the middle of this. So they're not seeing this clearly, and it could be too late before you do something. So there are resources out there. There's RAIN. RAIN is a really good resource. You can actually message RAIN on the internet, and then the messages disappear. So no one can track your computer. No one can track your phone to see if you've messaged them. But what that does is it sends a signal to certain entities, police force, that there's something going on. Now, does that put the victim in harm? I've had that asked. Well, what about wouldn't that put the victim in harm that you're telling them? Well, they're in harm anyway. And it's kind of a catch-22 with that. I mean, honestly, because, if they find out, are they in harm? If you do nothing, they're going to be in harm. But the sooner you can reach resources that can help this person find a way to get out, is vital. And every second counts. Every minute counts. Every day counts. It's vital. If you have the resources, if you have the resources, get them out. Use the resources and get them out. But if you don't, which is, a lot of times, not many people have the resources to be able just to get someone out like that. Use these services like RAIN or the domestic violence hotline. Use these services and they'll tell you exactly what to do. They'll tell you exactly what to do and how to help someone to try to get them out of harm's way. Protective orders. Now, I will tell you, I know protective orders are only as good as the paper they're written on. People tell me that all the time. They're like, well, why would you say that? Because they don't mean anything. But what they do is they're a paper trail. And you want a paper trail. In these type of situations, anytime there's domestic violence, you want a paper trail. Because of Gabby Petito's case, everyone pretty much knows Gabby Petito's case, and we all hate that, she suffered at the hands, lost her life at the hands of her boyfriend. But because of her case, her family has worked hard to get these different laws in place. So these law enforcement have the tools to know what to ask for. And they have a questionnaire that they have to ask. And if they see any sign of that, they have to automatically arrest their perpetrator. Now, there's some states that don't recognize this yet, but that is being, there's big strides to really try to cut that off and to get that so this can happen. Have a paper trail. Write down everything you've heard or seen if it's your family member. Reach out to these resources. If you need resources, reach out to me. I'd be glad to give you resources. I'd be glad to help you to go to the people that can really tell you what you need to do to get your loved one out. I could tell you some specific things, but whether you're in the city to rural, whether you're in Oklahoma, which is the #1 domestic violence in the state, which is where I'm at, or you're in a state that, has a lot lower domestic violence rate, it can happen anywhere. There is no place that you will not see it. That doesn't exist. And it happened back in the day too. People think it didn't happen, but it did. It was very prevalent. And actually it was probably more prevalent because it was swept under the rug and there wasn't people outing people. And it was just, it was more of you belong to me. You're my, like a contract almost, back then. And so I don't want to give specifics to people because I don't want them to, then say, oh, well, you told me to do this, so I have to be really careful. But please know call the domestic violence hotline. If you ever have any question, call them and they will tell you exactly what to do in your area. They will tell you exactly where you can go in your area. Or if you want to be confidential because you're a victim, message RAINN. They will tell you. It's RAINN. They will tell you exactly what to do, and then it will disappear. Sorry, that is just, I worry about telling specifics just so people don't, they're like, okay, well, you told me this and I did this and it didn't work. So I'd rather them reach out to the people that do it every day. But there are resources. You're not alone. I've always told people, if in doubt, just pick up the phone, call Oklahoma Domestic Violence Hotline. Call them first, and then they'll get you to where you need to go.
And I think there's two things that I would add to that piece. One, if you're a friend or a loved one, just letting that person know that, one, you're there, and two, that if they need a safe place, you have a bag packed and you're ready to go. And leave it up to the victim to provide the timeline, because the reality is they're going to know best when it's safest for them to leave. And trust me when I said that we have plans, we've thought about this. This is not some decision we've come to lightly. This is years and years of building up until the point where we're like, okay, we can finally get away. And then the other thing that I would add too is that the paper trail piece is huge, because there have been several instances in my own, not my own experience because I didn't have kids, but I've seen it play out where the abuser will take child welfare, for example, and flip the script and say, no, it's mom or it's dad that's doing all of the violence, when it's actually they're the victim. And I've seen it play out time and time and time again.
Yes, that is a good point, because it's horrible how that happens. I've seen so many cases, like you just said, where they've just flipped the script and that person has ended up with custody of the children. And this, where they have they should never have their children. And
no
so
business. Yeah.
no. So you have to keep a paper trail. As hard and, as frustrating as it might be, if the law enforcement aren't doing something at first, in the end, you'll be glad you have every single phone call, every single thing. Another thing I tell people is every interaction that you have with someone where they say something abusive or do something abusive, document that time and date.
Time and date and what happened. And something else too is that I recommend to folks is if you have a safe friend or a family member and there's ever a situation where you go, did I see that correctly? Did I experience that the right way? And just kind of pull your friend or loved one to the side and ask for clarifying questions like, this is what happened. Am I crazy here? Because sometimes it takes that validation of a friend to say, no, you're not. That's jacked up. And that sort of helps along the way because like your ego is shot, your whole body and sort of you're in this sort of mode of survival, and sometimes you just can't tell what's real and what's fiction. The master manipulators are also master liars, and so a lot of the things they tell you aren't true, and so there's a lot of unpacking that you have to do, but when you're in survival mode, it's almost impossible to do that unpacking.
That's so true. When you're in the moment, you can't see. That's why a lot of times, so even though, I have a counseling master's and I've done, a lot with that and done all my hours and was a school counselor, when it happens to you, you can't see it. You can tell everybody else what to do all day long, but when it happens to you, you're like, what do I do? And that's been me. I mean, with situations, even just recently, I told you about with the loss of my dad, that I could help people with grief all day long. And then when it happened to me, I just sat on the couch and stared at everyone walking by because I had no idea what to do. And that's what I was trained for. So you have to remember that no matter what, if you don't blame yourself, don't ever blame yourself, because it can happen to anyone. It can happen to the most brilliant person on this earth. It doesn't matter how book smart you are. It doesn't matter how street smart you are. It doesn't matter. There's going to be someone out there that's going to be more cunning. There's always someone out there that's more cunning than the next. And if they think that you are, empathetic enough and you fit their criteria, then they will try it. And it doesn't matter, and you might not see it because you're inside of it.
And I think also one of the things that I'm sort of proud that I did along the way is I put a firm boundary on physical contact, because she started to sort of play with the idea of physical contact, and that was a boundary that I put in place because of familial history of domestic violence. And so even with that, I totally missed the signs. And so it was like that. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, that should have been a warning, or that should have been like, there's a lot of going back on your life and like, oh, why didn't I see that sign? Why didn't I see that sign? And it takes a while to heal. And yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just shaking my head. Yes. Like, it does take a long time. I mean, I don't know that some people ever heal. And I'm not saying that to scare people, but one of the things I tell people to help with that, if you compartmentalize it and put it in the back of your mind, it will not go away. Anytime you compartmentalize anything, it is not going to go away. Our minds and our memories are not made for that. So anytime you shove something back there and you refuse and you deny it ever happened, at some point it will come forward. So if you can, deal with it. Try to get that, if you cry or however you get that out, because the more you harbor it and put it away, the harder it's going to be later, the harder it will fall. And so you really want to try to deal with that and get ahead of it if you can, because it will. I promise. I tell everyone, if the one thing you have listened to me know this, from research and studies and what I do, it will come out. It will not sit there your whole life and never come out. It just doesn't work that way.
And basically, you have two options. You can have it come out under the guidance of a therapist who can help you to go through all of this stuff in a calm, professional manner, or it's going to come out when you're not in a therapy session and it has the potential to cause all kinds of secondary trauma along the way.
That's right. You that was a great point. Thank you, because you can be re-traumatized. You can re-traumatize people. It is, you can have recurrent trauma, you can have recurrent victimization. And that's really what that is when it's just reoccurring, and you don't want to do that to yourself or anyone else. And so you really have to be cognitive of that and aware of that. And, I wanted to say earlier when I said, if you have the means just to get someone out, I was referring to a case of a celebrity. And so, where her parents were able to just, Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise, where her parents were just able just to get her out and hide her and all that. That doesn't happen very often. But I like to say that because there are celebrity cases or cases where people are high profile and they do have the means to do that. But those are few and far between normally.
Because more often than not, you'll see that there's a financial disparity between the abuser and the victim, because I've seen case and time and time again where the abuser does something to jeopardize the work of their partner. And so they make them not only physically and mentally not reliant, but it's even more than that, dependent. But then that financial dependent piece makes it so much harder, because where am I going to go? How am I going to feed my family? All of these questions. And you're like, okay, I'm at least here. And I hate when we have to use that at least in our brains, but we do that sort of, well, at least here, my needs here are met. My needs here are met. And so it's this balancing act of how much can I take before you finally decide enough's enough.
Well, and a lot of times people say, well, they can come to my house. I told them they can come live with me. I can keep them safe. But this is the thing, is they don't want to bring you into that. They don't want you hurt. So a lot of times they won't do that just because they don't want you to be hurt. So you have to take that into effect, that when someone gets out of that situation, it's usually in a safe house. It's usually somewhere that is an known location. There are safe houses, and that is again back to where you can get with the resources, domestic violence hotline, RAIN. There's so many other, CASA has so many other things that they have federal funding for, that they can, resources to domestic violence. I was the president of a domestic violence board in Oklahoma, and I learned about safe houses there and about safe homes, and it was such a great thing, because these are, and when I say this, I think people sometimes get in their head, they're falling down, dilapidated. No, these are cute little places that they put you, that is an unknown location, and they keep it very secure and very safe, and they have security. There's all kinds of things. So with that, said, I don't know that, in the Katie Holmes case, I don't know if he was an abuser in any way, shape, or form. I don't know, if there was domestic violence there. I just know that's what she did, and she's very public about it, to get out of that relationship. So please don't think I'm not accusing Tom Cruise of any domestic violence, but when you see that, and she said that's what she did to get out of this marriage, that's something that if you have the means, you can move them to an unknown location. But if not, then use the resources available to you.
And another thing, too, that I want to highlight, especially in terms of that time when they decide to leave and then they're telling you their story, if there was one thing I could plead for people out there, is just to believe someone. If they come up and they tell you about a situation that they're dealing in or that they're going through, just believe them. At the very minimum, because that is that's the door to being able to do something about it. because so many times where people just don't believe you, or they don't want to hear it, or they're very dismissive, and that's like the worst thing you can do to a victim, is to, one, not believe them, or two, be dismissive about their fears and concerns for safety.
Yet you have to, if they're telling you something, it doesn't matter. Take them at face value. Take them there. Take them, whatever they say, and take that, because it's going to be that one time you didn't, that they're going to be in danger. So you have to roll with it, and you have to know, okay, they're telling me this, there's a reason. And I had a friend when I was, I was in my 20s, but I knew those signs to look for because I'd been in a relationship like that since, it started when I was 15. And so I went to her and I was like, okay, you've had this and this happen to you physically, and it's concerning to me. I didn't have the tools. I didn't know what I was doing. There was no social media. There was no cell phones. This is before you had, and so that's why I tell people, think about how it used to be when you didn't know these things to do, unless you got something in the mail or you looked up, someone knew something you didn't know. And so I told her, I said, well, what can I do? And she said, never be my friend again. And so she never talked to me again until not too long ago. And she is divorced now from this person, but I don't know what happened all those years, and I know what I saw, but at least, and I think, gosh, I lost a friendship over that. But you know what? I would have rather lost a friendship over it and talked to her about it and made sure she recognized the signs than I would have not to say anything. Being a bystander is really not a good thing. And if we can speak up, we need to, because they're in danger anyway. They're in danger. So if you can talk to that person and speak up to them and say, hey, what can I do to support you? Can I call? What can I do? I'm going to, give you this hotline. Do you feel secure? Like, these rain, it'll go away. Like, what can I do? Let me do something.
And that is huge. Just because, like, the amount of times where you feel that isolation, you feel like you're alone on this planet, to have people reach out and ask that question starts to reframe the brain and the way it looks at things as well. Because, like, you get stuck in this rut, if you will, and you doubt yourself, you're doubting everything about you, you don't really know, up is down is up, and nobody talks to you about that kind of thing. And so when you first finally have that, like, I remember the first time I saw the power wheel, or the control wheel. Oh. The power and control wheel. Because up until that moment, I thought domestic violence was just about physical altercations. I had no idea that, no, that's just a small sliver of the power and control. It's mostly mental. It's mostly mental gymnastics and mental games and mental things that the abuser does towards the victims, and it just adds up over time.
Sorry if you can hear my...
Oh, it's all good.
I'm sorry. I have a Great Pyrenees.
Aww.
He goes with me on all my travels with crime and all that. So he's my protector, and he was checking in on me in my office. So, barking. Yes. So we have to. It's a hard place to be in, whether you're the victim or the victim's family, the victim's friend. And it's a tough place to be in, because you don't want them to be hurt. You don't know sometimes what's control and what's not, and from this other person, because you like them and you think, they would never do that to my child or my loved one. And but you have to remember that if the victim is telling you something, it doesn't matter what you've seen the other person do. You've got to listen to them, because there's something behind it. And even if it turns out to be nothing, I would much rather, with with my conscience, do something about it and listen than I would to just brush it under the mat. And so that's many times what happened back in the day. And then the control factor would be so extreme, and they would control the person's whole family. And you don't want to do that. You really, it's just, domestic violence is very sad, and it's very unfortunate because it doesn't need to happen. And domestic violence is not just physical, is just usually what comes later. Mental is the 90% of, and emotional is 90% of what happens. And so just because someone's not hitting you does not mean they're not abusing you.
And I really want to hit that point because the impacts are still the same. Like the trauma impact on the survivor is still the same regardless if it's just mental, because it's not just mental. It's severe mental abuse, and it takes a lot to get over that. It's so I was talking before about memory, and what happens is in a traumatic situation, we go into fight or flight. And, and a lot of people say freeze, but I have my whole thoughts on freeze. So as if we're freezing, we're fighting because we're not leaving the situation. So anyway, that's just kind of my whole, that's a maybe I get that.
Professor thing. But, so we go into that, and what happens is that our body takes over unconsciously. We don't have, it moves in tandem. Our minds and our bodies move in exact tandem to each other when we're in this fight or flight mode. We don't tell our bodies, okay, move your arm, or maybe it's happening so fast we don't even realize it's happening. And so a lot of people say, okay, I don't remember like this part of it, but I remember this part of it. Well, try to think about if you've had that happen to you several times. So when that fight or flight happens, you're going to be conditioned to it, and you're going to know, okay, I'm not so scared anymore. I mean, you might be scared, but you're not, what's going to happen because it's happened. So say someone's been abusing you mentally, and then it's happening and happening and happening, and then they start physically abusing you, and it's happening and happening. Your fight or flight is going to go down because you're going to be used to that situation. I know that sounds horrible, but it's true. We don't get it. It's just like I've told people with the police officer, when they first go into, right out of the police force, they go into a shooting, they are going to be in fight or flight. But then say 15 years down the road, they go into a shooting, it's going to be completely different. Because they've been in that situation time after time after time. And it's the same thing. Even though it's not right, and we might still be scared, we're conditioned to it. So our reaction is going to be different. So I always tell people, listen to those reactions. Watch those. Because those will, when you do that, they will dump into your long-term memory, and then you will have it in there. And because traumatic things, we tend to keep in our long-term memory. Everything else is in our short-term memory, and our short-term memory is endless, but our long-term memories are not. So what happens is when you dump that out of your short-term memory, then it's almost like, well, where is it? And I don't remember that. I don't know what this is went on, and this is happening to me. And that's why a lot of times people get into all these situations and these repeat victimization, because they don't, I'm just trying to think of the right word. Sorry. They don't remember that when you're in fight or flight, you've got to really pay attention to that, because that right there is going to be your memory bank. Does that make any sense?
It does. And so along those same lines, though, do you find that when you have experienced that trauma over and over again, that even though you're not sort of in that fight or flight mode mentality, your body is kind of still in that mode, right?
It's funny because I've seen domestic violence situations where the person has put up no fight. Shanann Watts, that case. Shanann Watts is the one in Colorado where, what was her husband's first name? I can't remember her name, but he committed familicide. And it was she had 2 little girls and she was pregnant. And she put up no fight. They said there was no, defense marks. There was, in fact, there was a lot of this came from him, of course, but they didn't find any defense wounds on her. But she trusted him, and she's probably went through so much mentally that she probably thought he'll never do it. He'll never really do it. And I think that's where people get. And so when you're not in that fight or flight mode, your body is just like, oh, they won't do it. So, because it's happened so many times, you think they'll never push it past that point until they do, if that makes any sense.
It totally does. I really appreciate that you put that frame of reference there, because I could see myself telling myself that, she'll, at least I know she'll never get to this point. At least I know she'll never get to that point. But then some points happen and you're like, maybe she will. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and you see in Shanann Watts' case, she didn't react because she's been so conditioned to that, and that fight or flight's probably gone, and so she's like, he's not going to do anything.
Here we go again. I just need to get through tonight, and then it'll be the honeymoon period, and then everything will be fine, at least for another month. Yeah. The other thing, too, that I've realized along the way is those honeymoon periods got shorter and shorter as time got on. And so there was more and more craving of those initial moments of that honeymoon period. Can you sort of talk a little bit about what the honeymoon period is?
So the honeymoon period is this blissful time of just love and laughter, and they show you the best them. Now, does this mean that's really them? No, that's a wool and sheep's clothing, but they show you the person that they think you want them to be. And so they will put on this persona. And I say that probably a little 10% of it is them, because, if they show you a little bit of their life, well, that is probably a little bit of their life, but they take the other 90% and they shut it off, and they make it someone more grand, someone more, loving, someone more just that's never had any problems in their life. But if you ever notice, their past relationships are always that other person's fault. and when you see that, and I laugh at that because it seems like that happens all the time, where everything's everyone else's fault in their relationship. They did this to them. They cheated on them. They talked to them this way. And so they say these things, but at the same time, they're telling you that I would never do that. I'm such a loving, wonderful person. We're going to be together. I'm going to take you here. We're going to go on trips. I'm just going to be this person that you have dreamed of. And that honeymoon phase, it lasts a little longer longer the first time, because they've got to make you believe them. And then as time goes on, it gets shorter and shorter because that manipulation. So if you had I don't know so much sometimes in my research if I think they don't care enough to do that later, if they're worn out with that part of themselves, because they can only hold that up so long, or if it gets shorter because they feel like if they get vulnerable at all, you can see through them, so they make it shorter and shorter, so it makes them less vulnerable. I'm kind of on the fence about that. I've done a lot of research on both, but I think they both could be true.
I could see a lot of instances where the latter is true in my case. Yeah.
They don't want to be vulnerable.
Because that true character comes out. You hear them talk about, I want to play people chess. I'm able to manipulate everybody at work into doing exactly what I want. It never occurred to me that I was also being manipulated to do whatever they wanted. But it was she told me, I just didn't listen.
Yeah, and they will, and that's why I say listen. When they tell you something, listen to it, because no one can keep a persona 100% of every single day. It's not possible for anyone. Even the psychopaths like Ted Bundy and people that are serial killers and things like that, even they have their breaking points. It's when they cycle and they go into such a rage kind of at the end where they go into a frenzy. That's when they've kind of lost that facade, because they just go into this frenzy. And that's when, a lot of times their murders pick up and they get, it's instead of one every couple months, it's like back to back to back for a short period of time. And that's what that is. That is them, that facade falling off. And so you think about that with the people that are the most cunning in the world. I mean, this is a very small percentage of the world that are, can be that cunning to be a true sociopath or true psychopath where they have no empathy whatsoever and no conscience. Think about if they can't do it, that anyone else could keep that up all the time. It's just, it's going to fall off at some point. And so I think that love bombing gets smaller and smaller because they lose their patience less and less.
That's interesting that you put the patience piece on it, because you would think that it's the victim that has to worry about patience, but really it's the abuser that has no patience. That's part of the equation.
It is.
Oh,
yeah, they don't have patience. They will at first because it's new and it's exciting to them, and it's a conquest. And I say conquest because it is. It's a conquest for control. And that's how they see it. And I it's hard to say they see the other person as a person, but if they saw you as a person and saw you as a human being, they wouldn't do these things to you. So.
And I think that one of the most profound experiences I had was with a friend after I decided to leave. And he asked me a question that will resonate with me to this day. He said, take a look at everything that she has done. Would you do that to anyone else? And the answer is unequivocally no. And he's like, well, then you have your answer.
Wow.
That was like,
that was pretty smart. That was good.
Yeah. It totally shook my world in a good way. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Because and I didn't even have to search for that answer. It was instantaneous. No, I would never do half of the things that she did.
Well, and I always tell people too, they're going to make you feel guilty for any little thing you do. So you have to remember that, you think back on things they did and you're like, but I did this. Well, why though? Think about why you did the things you did, and think about, okay, so were you reacting to something they did? Now that's still your choice to make that decision. I'm not putting, our things on anyone else, what we do. But when you're so manipulated and you're so broken down, I think the victim does react a lot from just trying to survive, whereas the abuser is very responsible for their actions because they are not, they know they're in control. It's the controller, and that knows, okay, I know the answer to this question. They know it because they've done it I guarantee probably more than, this one person. They've been in multiple relationships like this where they do that. It's not usually just a one and done thing unless they get caught or something. But normally it's a cycle, and it normally starts, from, I say it starts in their first relationship. And the funny thing is when I say this, most people are like, what? But you only see it a little bit in their first relationship. So their first love, you only see it a little bit because they're usually younger. That narcissism has not completely set in yet. It's there, the propensity's there, but they're not quite sure what to do with any of that. And so you see it a little bit, and then each relationship, they figure out how to do it more and more and more. So if you look back at a lot of abusers' first relationships, they'll say, oh, they were like this to me or like this to me, but usually those are the ones that, if you notice, are still alive. The very first ones, because they are not. That's like their test, and it's interesting. Now, not always. That's not the that's the norm, but that's not always. I've seen many times where people have been in first relationships and they've done that. But I do see that more than I do not see that. And I wonder, like why that is. Like, why do they... And I think it's because they're still vulnerable themselves at that age.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And they don't have the practice yet. And it could very well be that they don't really fully realize that that's what they want or crave yet.
Is that control? Yeah. And so a lot of times, you'll see it too, where they'll have a little bit of empathy for that person. And then, as it goes on, then their empathy wanes for the next person, because, they become who they are. But, and it's interesting because, I've seen that happen and I'm like, wow, the statistics back this up, but why is that? It's got to be, my only thing I've come up with research, it's got to be they're vulnerable still at that point.
Which totally makes sense. Wow. Well, we've been at this for well over an hour. And I would like to round out our conversation just sort of like talking about it from the victim's perspective or the survivor's perspective, because I want survivors who might be hearing this to know that there is light on the other side. That it may seem dark, it may be in your spot, but like once you make that decision to leave and you've successfully left, there is beauty on the other side. There is love on the other side. And I just want people to hear that, because a lot of times like that's something you don't believe to your core until you get to that other side.
Thank you for saying that, because that is so true. There is always, you can't give up. You have to believe that your life is very worthy and you don't deserve that. And not every single person not everyone's like that. Not everyone's going to treat you like that. And you have to realize that sometimes that's hard, because they think, well, I'll just get into the next relationship and they'll treat me like that too. And that's not true. It's really not true. I know it's hard to see that when you're in the relationship, but you can have healthy relationships. You can go on to have healthy relationships. You might always have that with you, and you might always, hold that trauma with you. But again, get that trauma forward, get it out in a healthy way with, a professional, and have them help you, or, do something that is coping in a positive way. I always say, please don't turn to drugs and alcohol to fix your problems, because those mask. So when you're coping, when you turn to a substance, it masks, it doesn't take it away. It will still be there once that substance wears off. And so it's not going to take it away. So try to cope. PTSD is real when it comes to anything, really, but really domestic violence, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the thing about that is, post-traumatic stress disorder, if you get a handle on it in the beginning, you can actually overturn that and get that, and overcome. But once it becomes chronic, you cannot overturn it. And it is embedded, it is there, then all you can do is cope with it. So that's why it's so important to get help right away, because once it becomes chronic, there's no going back. It's just coping. And that's with anything, not just domestic violence. That's in any victim. That's natural disasters. That's anything. So you please take that with you, listeners, and know that you're not alone. Domestic violence is very prevalent. Unfortunately, like I said, Oklahoma, where I'm at, we're the number one state in the country for domestic violence. So, and I think a lot of that is, and this is just me, but rural communities, a lot of times they don't have resources or knowledge. Not that they're not smart. They're smart people, but it's that they don't have those, they're kind of alienated from they're kind of set off, and I mean rural, like where you have like 100 people, 50 people in the town. And a lot of times they don't know what's out there because someone keeps them isolated in that rural community and they only know what's around them. So that doesn't mean they're not smart, but if we don't know what's in front, what's there to help us, it doesn't matter how smart we are. And so big cities can be helpful in that sense because there's so many things around us. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and also with big cities versus rural, you know, in big cities there's probably a bed somewhere, and in rural communities you may actually only have 5 beds at a shelter, and it might be full, and you might not be able to leave because you don't have anywhere safe to go, and so that also compounds it, I think.
Well, in a car, a lot of people don't think about transportation, but if you're in a rural community, you're 20, 30, 40 miles off the beaten path. How are you going to get there? You know, a lot of people don't think about that. You know, a lot of times their cars are taken away and they don't have a car. They have a car they share with the abuser, and the abuser a lot of time controls when they drive it. So, you know, you have to think about that part too. And, you know, now with technology, we have not AirPods, but sorry, I said AirPods. We have Apple tracers on people's car. I'm all about Apple. We have Apple tracers on, we can put on, you know, people's cars on, and they don't even know because they're just little. So abusers can trace people wherever they go. So that's why I say to fall back on those resources, because they can help you do that safely. If you don't know, make sure to reach out, because that's what they're there for. They're the experts that help people every day get out of domestic violence situations.
And I think we're going to end with letting people know 1-800-799-SAFE as the national hotline for if you want to leave a domestic violence situation. They also have a chat feature. They also have text features. But you also talked about RAINN, right? So that's RAINN.
Yes.
And do they have...
They should have... a lot of times, though, if you go on your phone and you start a chat with them, they will automatically... it'll just disappear. So a lot of times that's how they do theirs, because no one can trace it in your phone or your computer. So here's the phone
it looks
number.
Like it's rainn.org, RAINN.org.
And the phone number is 1-800-656-HOPE.
Mandy, thank you so much. And I'll end the podcast. The way I always end the podcast, folks, be kind. We all live on the same planet. We breathe the same air, and this world would just be a much better place if we treated everybody with dignity and respect.
Thank you
Mandy,
so much.
Thank you.